Part two. So, we left that morning. I was living in Strasburg at the time, and we would drive out to Hague, Virginia. Ugly name, but anyways. She'd drive me out there, and the exorcisms would usually begin around 10 or 11. And so the setting was this. We would arrive. She stayed somewhere else during, so she wasn't there. And basically had 3 priests, and then for a while there was a deacon there, who they removed, I think, after this exorcism. I think this was the last exorcism that he was present at. And then there was like 3 more years of him. And this particular deacon was super charismatic. A lot of people don't realize that Catholicism has a charismatic element, and that there are a lot of charismatics there that are very similar to Pentecostal charismatics. And I'm not trying to bag on any Pentecostal Christians watching or anybody who's charismatic, but I do believe that there are dangers to that type of mentality and what is done, and the reasons why. I've spoken about it in some of my videos, but I'll probably get into it more eventually elsewhere. Not judging anybody specifically, but this guy was bad news, as were many of the people that were there. So it's basically a big open room. It was like a missionary church, and so they'd have everything shut down. Nobody came there except the team that was there to do this exorcism. And so you had the 3 priests, you had this deacon. There were about 3 women usually that showed up, and the women would, for the most part, just sit in chairs and watch and observe, and the supposed reason for this was to make sure there was no abuse going on, or anything appropriate in that sense, and kind of keep those things in line. But they particularly handpicked people that were into all the charismatic element of things. And so 2 out of 3 of these women supposedly would have visions constantly and see things, and then they would guide the exorcist to target different things or different demonic spirits and take different approaches depending on what they were feeling and seeing and experiencing at the moment. And so that was kind of their standing there at this time, though later on things got more intense, and one of them particularly started laying on top of me during these exorcisms, literally like across my body on top of me, and started pushing boundaries and started violating, and I was very, very clear that I was not okay with it, and basically started being forced into situations with this woman. And they eventually put her in charge of coordinator position to make it so that I couldn't communicate with anybody except through her, when they knew that basically I had reported that she had crossed boundaries and that I was not comfortable with her. And so these people kind of went out of their way to do anything at all possible to make me uncomfortable, or to traumatize me, or to put me in a position where I felt like I had no power over my own self or my own body or what happened. So there was a nun there as well for a while, and I actually really liked the nun that was there initially. She seemed very down to earth. She was probably one of the first times I experienced meeting a decent person. Seemed like that was a nun, because when I was at Catholic private school, the nuns were horrendous, evil, straight up evil, you know, basically boil your children and eat them type of people. I would ask myself as a child, why would you become a nun? Why would you do this? You know, if this is how you feel about kids, if this is how you treat innocents. So I liked her. You know, I thought that she was my friend, and I kind of trusted these people initially, because again, at the beginning, they make you feel like you're important and to them, and that they're really going to help you, and that they're not going to be like the person and the abuse that you just got out of, and you can trust them. And for whatever reason, which I know the primary motive of the bishop at that time was to keep me quiet. The primary motive of the bishop at that time, after Eitenauer came out, was to put me in this process as if they were helping me, because he wanted me to be quiet. He did not want what really happened to come out. He didn't want people to know that he knew Eitenauer was doing this to me and other women, and just left him for 2 months. They didn't want, he didn't want this stuff out. None of them do. These priests and these clerics and these bishops, and they're never held to the standards of the law. They're rarely ever put through the regular processes of, the legal system. They just have their own canon court, which they never even hardly ever use. And you assume as a Catholic, because I really was a devout Catholic, and I trusted and I believed, even if they were corrupt, that it was God's church and it would work out. And you just go along, you just trust. And in retrospect, it seriously gives me chills to realize the positions that I put myself in with these people, because I thought that they were of God, and because I was indoctrinated into believing that they had this all total power and authority. So you had quite a few people in there. It wasn't like with Eitenauer, where it pretty much ended up being me and him alone, and then him and this other woman alone, and then the woman in Indiana and the woman in Florida, and God knows how many other women there were. I know there were more. So of course none of this went legal. The one woman, I think, tried to sue legally, but God only knows what they did or threatened her with. Again, they have so much money, they have so much political standing that you guys don't realize. You can't win a fight in this world of this world with the Catholic religion. We honestly, I believe, have to wait, for Jesus to come back, and take care of it, really. So I'd get there, and almost immediately, and I always was very, very careful how I dressed, because I knew God only knew what could happen, but I was always super paranoid and afraid because of what had already happened to me. And so I'd usually wear layers and layers of clothing, and everything from socks to my hoodies up to my, and I generally liked having my hair down because I didn't want anything showing, and I didn't like to be looked at in that state. I didn't want people to see me. I was very, very much kind of humiliated by it and afraid, and you're not in control during it. And I was supposedly one of the few rare people that would be aware during. And apparently that wasn't something that typically happens that often. And it was something that was common with other family members, because this was a generational demonic problem that the Catholic Church had known about for decades. And it's even in the Vatican, the files on my family. I'm not going to say the last name on here. So, but my uncle, and Catholic godfather, which I reject. I don't have godparents. I'm not a Catholic anymore. Not that he ever had anything to do with my life anyway. Supposedly he also was aware during exorcisms. And so I've used the analogy about being in the back seat of a car. When I'm going through an exorcism, they have a chair, they have you sit down in this chair, and then they've got a priest on your left and a priest on your right. They each have one of those purple stoles, and they basically have your wrists. And then you have the head priest who's doing the exorcisms. Now, thank the true Christian God that there was at least one person there that I wholeheartedly believed had my best interest at heart. And I thank the Christian God that was the head exorcist that they had appointed at the time. Now, here's the thing. You might be asking yourself, well, if it's so evil and their intention isn't good, then why would they put a priest who had your best interest at heart and didn't want to hurt you? Well, something that a lot of people don't realize that I'm going to be exposing today is that the exorcist has the least power of anybody in the situation, in the system, the way that it's set up. This man, this priest, but this human man, had literally no say in what happened. He was a puppet. And over the years, I would see it. I would see the confusion in his face, and I would see it in his eyes that he was just as lost as I was, and he didn't like what was happening to me. He didn't believe they were taking the right paths and doing the right things. He saw that I was deteriorating. He saw that I was being neglected. He saw these different boundaries being pushed. But due to the vows of obedience that they have you take as priests and nuns, again, for this reason, because you're going to burn in hell if you don't do everything that they say, and even if it's something evil, it's going to fall on them, not you, because you're under obedience. You have to listen to them. So, actions speak louder than words, though. They really, really do. The words do matter. They really can matter quite a bit. This priest, to this day, and when I very first came out of the Catholic Church and was baptized into Christianity, I actually reached out to him. I gave him the link for this channel. I do not know if he's ever come to it. I don't know if he's ever watched anything. I don't know if he still does, possibly. But I do believe wholeheartedly that this priest did not want to do a lot of the things that they were having him do, and knew that something was off and something was wrong, to the point where he started communicating with me behind the scenes and, calling me and praying with me over the phone and asking me questions and stuff, it became very clear that there were sides. So at this point during this exorcism, there weren't really sides. This was before people started getting moved. And some of the priests varied, but not the head exorcist that did the exorcisms. He was always there. And I'll always remember the first exorcism that the bishop from St. Louis performed in front of everybody at the bishop's house. That priest, the one that they put as an exorcist, was the most terrified looking one there. And so I'm not sure what their motives for picking him was. I think it was probably because of his humility and his ability and desire to obey and do everything that he's told, and just kind of not really being in the loop of what was happening. And so that might have been why they chose him. But in reality, the people who ran this were charismatic lay Catholics, and primarily this deacon until they removed him. And then basically he was working in the background, and then his people, charismatic people, were running it. And so what you had was an actual demonic possession, and Catholic clerics, priests, exorcists, full processes and everything that they put me through. And then these people who are caught up in this emotional, melodramatic mumbo-jumbo directing the entire thing. At this time, they would also consult with me because I was aware during, and at this time, I very much still trusted them and didn't ask many questions. And so they would try to get information on what I was seeing and what I was experiencing at the time, and so they'd kind of stop in between. So I'd start out sitting in a chair, and I always dreaded it because this is exactly how it went down every time. They would start the prayers. They'd usually do a litany, where they're invoking their Catholic saints, which are pagan idols. And so you have this invocation that starts as very similar to a seance in reality. Very, very similar, necromancy, all that happens. It's just under the guise of Catholic, which is under the guise of some sort of Christian religion, and it's not. And so it starts out by invoking all these pagan saints. And then the rite goes into addressing and naming multiple titles of the devil, multiple titles of Satan, and the dragon, and on and on and on. And I remember the noonday devil was one that always got a huge manifestation. There were several different ones that would agitate, but I would experience basically I'm sitting there, I'm nervous, I don't want to be there, I hated going through these, and I pushed through them because I believed I was going to be liberated, like I was told, that this was going to pay off, that God wanted me free, and that I would be free through these exorcisms, and when it happened, I would know it. So, almost immediately when this would start, I would feel, I don't know how to explain, there's a lot of things I don't know how to explain from the supernatural and what I went through, guys. I'm going to try my best. It's a literal physical sensation that happens along with fear. along with anxiety. Anybody who struggles with anxiety or panic disorder, you know how that can kind of come off as even affect you physically. And it was very much like that, but kind of intensified beyond anything that I experienced on a human level. And so I would feel the manifestations, I would feel things rising up before they would see something happen. And I would generally see it in a way. It wasn't visually with my eyes, but I saw it in a different way. I think it was probably similar to the whole third eye concept of the demonic. And the more that they would read this ritual, the more that they would read and do these litanies and repeat these names of the demonic and whatever it was that they were going into, and I would get more and more, feel more and more agitation, feel more and more fear, or anger or rage or whatever that particular spirit or demon was feeling at the time. I would feel it. It was like I was a filter. It's as if you become the demon. That's honestly what it feels like. And it's not like you get angry and then you just start saying things. You literally have no control over what comes out of your mouth. You have no control over what your right arm does, what your left arm does, but you're aware. And it's terrifying. And so I basically am in a position where I have to trust all these people. These people could have done anything to me. And I trusted them. And again, because it was different than the way Eitenauer did things, I thought to myself, he was alone, and I was being shut up, even though I saw red flags, because my therapist was telling me it was because I was projecting past abuse onto him. And, you know, I forgive her. I do. And I know that she blames herself. I'm pretty sure she probably hates herself for what happened. But I do forgive her. And I know she didn't mean to. I know she never would have directed me to him if she knew the truth. So, anyway. You're there. I'm there. I know what's going on around me. I know this exorcism is happening. And there's just, it's so overwhelming. It's basically like being in another dimension. It's like I know what everybody else in that room is doing, and they're doing this right and trying to battle, you know, these demons and get information and whatnot. And I'm just there in this mess, and there's just spirit after spirit after spirit manifesting. It would be very, very difficult for them to get one singular demon to manifest and stay. There were just so many, supposedly, either mimicking many or that there were many. And there were like 3 different categories. I would see them in red, in green, and in black, and they ended up being associated with different things. There was a black category that was associated with illness and sickness and rape and abuse. And then there was the red, which was associated more with rage and violence and resentment and hatred and things like that. And then the green, which was actually they made 3 rings that made kind of a false trinity, and at the top was the green, and the green were more of the biblical, demonic, royalty level type, you know, Asmodeus, Beelzebub, you know, the ones that are in the Bible, the ones that are mentioned in the Bible, Meridian, all those. And so this particular exorcism actually, supposedly, Lucifer had manifested, and had not manifested under the name Lucifer, but under the either Aramaic or Hebrew word, the original Aramaic or Hebrew word, which was Halal. And so this particular exorcism went on 12 hours. It was about 4 or 5 hours in on my best guess, because I would get breaks every now and then. They would break and let me, like, try to drink some water, pee, or whatever. And so, I started getting sicker and sicker, how I was the night before. You guys know how I mentioned that night before I became so ill. And the things that I'm talking about are really disturbing, what I'm about to get into, so if you can't handle it or you're easily disturbed by stuff, I would just kind of stop here. there was particularly black ones manifesting there before the whole Lucifer came up. And I became so ill, and as we continued, each minute that passed, which seemed like an eternity to me, I became sicker and sicker. And time is something that just kind of ceases to exist during these. And even people on the outside, like people who weren't me, that are on the outside looking in, the people sitting in the chairs or the priests on the left or the right of me, they would all say the same thing. It's as if time ceases to exist. It's almost like it's been forever, but it's not been any time at all. It's just, it doesn't work. Once you're in this thing, it doesn't function and work the same way that regular time does in a day. And that just attests to the fact that there is something supernatural going on. That this is not just something that's harmless, that's not real. Like, these people think that this is, exorcism is freeing people, but there's really no demon there in the first place. That's not true. I'm sure it's true for some cases. But this isn't a situation where it's just harmless and not doing anything good, but also not doing anything bad. It is a satanic ritual. A lot of them may not realize this. I can't speak for everybody. And if this one priest that I speak of, that I believe actually had good intentions at heart and was very much similar to me as a Catholic, which was I truly believed, and I truly wanted to please God and do the right thing, and so I stayed in it no matter the abuse that happened to me, no matter what I went through. It is a satanic ritual. It is in the category of Ouija boards, seances, necromancy, all those types of things. This is not of God. It is not of Jesus Christ. The majority of the solemn rite, there's like teeny little parts that have an isolation of scripture that they communicate, and then the demon basically mocks those parts. But the majority of it is invocation of the pagan idols, their Catholic saints, the invocation of the Queen of Heaven, which is the primary Babylonian goddess. Not Jesus. Hardly ever Jesus is mentioned. Hardly ever is Jesus mentioned. And when he is mentioned, it's usually under Christ or the Son or these different things that can also be attributed to Satan. Because Christ in and of itself is not specifically isolated to Jesus. And so there's a lot of things that I didn't know as a Catholic, you know, because I didn't really read the Bible at all in context. I would just flip open isolations as I was told. So I remember it got to the point where I was basically to the point where I would say it was actual torture. Physically, emotionally, and mentally. And when we took a break at that point, it was to the point where I'd wanted to stop. I would want to stop, but I would never ask. I never wanted to be the one to end an exorcism early if it was the one that was supposed to liberate me for good. I never wanted to be the reason that it stopped. You know, I never wanted to be something that could possibly get in the way of me being freed. And so as much as I would want it to stop, it was 4 years in before I actually broke down at an exorcism and begged them to stop. But this one was actually worse, and I didn't ask them to stop. But I remember in my mind, I was so bad off at that point, and it wasn't relieving when they stopped. So it felt like the only way out of it, the only way to feel better would be to let them continue and then get this thing out, this particular thing that was making me sick. I don't really like to repeat names of the demonic. It's not that I'm scared of them, it's just that I don't like to give them attention. And so I'm not going to say the name of this one particularly, but, you know, they would ask me, can we continue or whatever. And I remember at that point I was so miserable, but I said, yeah, please continue, because I saw it as the only way out, the only way through it. And I couldn't imagine feeling like that another hour, you know, let alone another night or another day. But it just got worse. It's beyond what I could have imagined happening. They continue this repetitive cycle of the Solemn Rite, which was the old one that they did with me, not the new one. So it was the more kind of intense one that was original. And I can remember coming in and out. Sometimes I'd be able to say something in between. I think I even cried at that point, which I rarely did in any exorcism or during anything. Sorry about the light, guys. Kind of difficult for me to go back to these places. It just went on and on and on. And then I remember, you know, different things will come up. So whatever was making me sick, and then this Lucifer under the different language name came up. And then also there was Hitler, supposedly, or whatever demon went under the name of Hitler, or whichever one, saying that, you know, in the bloodline or whatever, I had some connection to the bloodline, which my mom's biological dad is full-blooded German, and so that's possible. I don't really care. I don't really have interest in it anymore to care or know. But all the details, that's the thing, is in an exorcism, it's like an interrogation, and they go for the details. And while they'll say, try to get as few details as possible because you don't want to run around in circles and give the demons attention, really that's kind of what ends up happening. It's a game. It's a cat and mouse game, and it just kind of goes in circles. And so at one point, I had received the Catholic Eucharist, which basically I was offered almost every time. Every time, actually, pretty much, I think. I'd be offered the reconciliation and Eucharist and this and this and that. And so I'd received the Eucharist at one point. It was supposed to be over. And that was when I got sick to the point where I had no ability to even function anymore. And I remember being in the corner, hunched over, trying not to throw up, because it's a problem if you throw up the Eucharist, you know, and you gotta try and eat it again, or they bury it or whatever. And so I was rocking back and forth, trying not to vomit, and before I knew, the thing took over. So the things would take over sometimes during the breaks. So it wasn't only just like they're in control, like I sit down, they start the rite, and then the demon manifests. So even though they say, oh, well, they can bind them, you know, because they're the priests and they have the authority, they can stop it, make it stop and go when they want, that's not true. That's not true at all. In fact, one of the things that became so frustrating to them was that they couldn't keep it under control. They couldn't stop it when they wanted it to stop. And the things would torment me regardless in between, and I would be told, oh, you'll be fine, we've bound it. That's what they would say, we've bound it, you're fine. You know, the hardest part of that was not the actual exorcisms itself, it was what happened in between them. And I was left completely alone in between those, and told that, oh, well, because they bound them, that I was fine, that nothing would happen to me, that it's a lack of faith on my part, or A, B, and C. There was always a displacement. They always put the guilt on the victim. They always say it's something that you're doing or not doing. So they proceeded, and this exorcism went 13 hours. This was the longest one with them. It went 13 hours. When they finally stopped, I begged them not to leave me alone. I remember being on the floor, guys. I was on the floor. It was carpeted, but it was like hard carpet floor. Really, you know, crummy, thin carpet. I remember I could hardly move, but I remember tears streaming down my face and just begging them. I said, you can't leave me like this. Please don't leave me like this. Make it. You gotta get it out. I said, you can't. I can't do this. I mean, I was being tortured. I remember feeling like I could see this black demonic hand in my throat and like pushing my tongue back and making me gag. And the nausea, like if you imagine the most nauseous you've ever been, pukey, vomiting, food poisoning, flu, whatever it is, that times like 500, I can't explain to you guys. I can't explain to you guys because it's not illness or pain that I can describe on a human level. It is that intense. It is to a point where I didn't know how I was still alive. I wanted to die. That's how miserable I was. And because they were all tired and it had been 13 hours, they were just going to leave me like that. And so that was traumatizing to me, especially based on my beliefs in them. And then I thought about, imagine had my friend not driven me. That's one of the nights that I probably would have crashed and died in a car accident. But anyways, they decided to call it quits. It had been 13 hours. And basically, I was in hell. The only thing I could think of is if, there's a hell, then this is it. Because it was unbearable. Yet there was nothing that I could do about it. And the fear and the anxiety that went along with it was just as inhuman as the physical suffering was the mental suffering. I couldn't understand or wrap my mind around how I received Jesus, supposedly. Yet these things were doing this to me, and they were able to completely torture me. So, I walked outside. My friend got me into the car. I was so... I had gone delirious. That's how bad the pain was. Actual delirium. I jumped out of the moving car as she was going down the gravel road with us, trying to go home. I jumped out of the car while it was moving. She slammed on the brakes when she realized that. I got in front of the car and I was sobbing, and I just cried out to her to run over me. I begged her to run over me. I just remember saying, I'm going to try not to say her name. I told my friend, I said, please run over me. Please, I can't take it. It's absolute torture. I can't do this. Please run over me. I'm like on my knees, execution style, sobbing and begging for her to run over me. That's the type of delirium I was put in. And so after she got out, it was actually it's not funny at all, but this particular part, she's a tiny little thing, and she dragged my ass back in that car and like shoved me in the car. She was like, no, I'm not running over you. She locked the doors so that I couldn't get them back open, put the child locks on. And so I'm in the passenger seat and she's driving. And it was 3.5 hours. I feel so bad for her in a way, because it was 3.5 hours of the most painful crying, moaning. I mean, like, imagine the cry of every mother who's lost a baby put together at once on top of 100 men being tortured. I mean, the sound to it, I could hear it myself, and it was disturbing to hear that coming out of me, because that's how bad it was. Every minute was like an eternity. She tried so hard to calm me down and help me feel better, and it was impossible. I was an absolute torture. I remember at one point she did pull over at a gas station and I vomited. And then I vomited in the car a couple times. And then when we finally got back, she'd spent the night that night and stayed with me. But basically the next 3 weeks, I got to a state where, I couldn't cry anymore, really. I couldn't sob or cry anymore. I had nothing left in me.